Good morning, South Carolina. I am so happy to be here. I'd also like to note that two of those kids under 10 are 6-year-old twin boys. So you can imagine what life looks like in my house. I am so excited to be here. Thank you so much to the Chamber for inviting me and allowing me to have this moment to share in fellowship with you all. Today we will be discussing the art of unmasking. And you may ask yourself, what does that mean, right? So we're talking about masks, okay? When we think about masks, we think about hiding, concealing. But what I'd like us to start to think about today is masks as a metaphor for identity. Not simply something that we hide and conceal ourselves from the world by, but literally the different parts of who we are. So as all of us in this room spend our long days fighting the good fight of diversity, inclusion, and equity, it's also very important for us to understand that we tend to focus on a lot of the macro issues, right? Or the metrics that we want to see. But what we're gonna start off this morning with is going individual, right? We're gonna talk about the psychology, the emotions, the thoughts that wind up creating some of the behaviors that we see that then create the diversity outcomes that are the challenge that we are all very aware of. So when we think about this idea of unmasking, what we're really talking about is identity. So I'd like us to everyone just ate, so this metaphor should not be a challenge for you. Think of a pizza pie. Raise your hand if you like pizza. Okay, I ate some last night, okay. Pizza pie. Everybody has different slices to their pie, right? So we all come into the world with a whole set of who we are. We tend to live in a society where we're defined by labels that we are just categorized by. So I like to say we have the usual suspects, right? We have race, gender, age, sexual orientation, political affiliation, religion, right? If you put on the news, those are typically the identity groups that you see. If you meet someone and someone says, oh, tell me about the person that you just met, that's usually what we go by. So what that creates is this other, self-other difference that automatically says if we meet somebody that is different, then we're not in alignment, right? And so difference exists no matter what. But what I want us to start to think about is identities are micro slices of our pizza pie. It goes beyond the usual suspects, right? It's really about our values and our individual differences and personality and thoughts and emotions and behaviors and life experiences. Those are the things that make up who we are, but where we tend to struggle is being self-aware enough to know which identities we have and when they're operating at what time in what situation. So if you're a person that had a life experience related to some type of trauma, related to an experience that you had, let's say, related to race, that experience is going to trigger certain experiences in the future. So the question is, are you even aware of what that may be? So when we think about identity, we also have to understand that identity is a two-sided coin. Identity can either operate as a source of affirmation, right? Or it can operate as a source of threat. So any given part of who we are can be positive or it can be a negative experience. What we tend to do is look at any given identity as unidimensional, right? So ideally, being a mom is always good. Moms in the audience, right? Okay, so if we utilize that example, as a mother, an identity that I have that is a sourse of affirmation is, oh, I created 3 humans, they're pretty smart and awesome, they're kind of cute, right? All of that makes me feel good. I've replaced myself in the universe, right? All of that makes me feel good and positive. But then there's days, right, where I'm looking at those 3 humans and say, wow, I have another 18 years to go, right? Or I'm getting on a plane and I'm missing a dance recital because I have a keynote to give somewhere, right? So any given identity can trigger a source of affirmation or threat. So when we think about it in the organizational context, the question is, what types of environments are we creating that is increasing the affirmation of people's identities, and what types of things are we doing to decrease moments that are creating and inducing threat? So we tend to use the language of microaggression often these days in the D&I space. But you know what I've started using? Macroaggression. You know why? Because it feels macro to the person. It's an experience in a moment that is triggering a threat, which is very real. So I think sometimes when we put micro on it, what does it do? Minimizes it, right? And if the person is already minimized in the moment, to then label it as a microaggression, and then the likely outcome that typically comes of, oh, I didn't mean it, right? And then we get into the intention issue. We'll talk about that later, right? Impact is impact, regardless of intention. And so when we're thinking about how identity matters, it really is about what are we doing to see the people in our organizations? Are we seeing them in their totality? Are we creating environments that are allowing them to align their identities with others? Are we creating situations where they have moments to feel safe to express different parts of who they are? Do they drive into the parking lot and turn the station because they don't want their colleagues to know what music they're listening to? Do they avoid certain hairstyles because they think that it will not align them for the next promotion? Is there certain art that they're not putting on their wall because it may signal and communicate an identity that they think may not be perceived or welcomed? These are things that people are dealing with every day. With the Mask Project, at this point, we've collected over 2,000 narratives of people's written experiences of wearing the mask at work and in life. And my husband calls it my obsession because, of course, new narratives come in all the time. So I'll just be laying in the bed politely while he's watching ESPN. And I'll just be scrolling and say, what are you looking at? I said, oh, a new narrative came in. And it's like reading a new book. I'm like, oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. Do you know what she just said? Oh, my gosh, right? And that's simply because we are all characters in our life stories, right? But what I want us to dig into a little bit differently today is most of the times we don't understand the nuances of our characters, but still have to go into the world and perform every day. So that lack of self-awareness, that lack of identity awareness, that lack of management of self creates a situation where we're not clear on what stage we're on at certain points in time. Who's our audience? How will they receive me? What mask do I need to wear when? I guess the world wants you to keep looking at my beautiful face, okay? So when we think about this idea of wearing the mask, one of the things that motivates me is a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar entitled, We Wear the Mask. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that poem before. So Mr. Dunbar wrote this poem a long time ago, but it's timeless. And an excerpt of it goes a little something like this. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks to shake our eyes. There we go. The debt we pay to human guile, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all of our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. So while Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote this during a time where he was speaking about the African-American experience in the United States and the idea of presenting two different selves and living in two different worlds, or like W.E.B. Du Bois talks about double consciousness, right? Living in two different spaces. The reality is that this amazing poet was also speaking about a human experience of figuring out who we are and how the world sees us and what it feels like. So when we look at the words of this poem, there are words that signal things that have deep emotional response. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile, right? Or tears and sighs. So while sometimes we tend to talk about issues of difference or leveraging difference in this highly optimistic, positive, type of way, we cannot minimize the reality that there is an emotional experience occurring with every human in every organization. And that when especially people are a part of a stigmatized group or a highly stereotyped group or a group that experiences bias on a frequent basis, we have to be clear that it's not just about managing policy. It's about managing the humanity of the lived experience of the people in organizations that we are interacting with. So again, I would like us to think about this idea that identity is the core. So there's research that shows us that our emotions impact our attitudes, which impact our, thank you, behaviors. What's your name? Thank you, Sybil, okay? All right, my fellow psych nerd. Okay, so emotions impact attitudes, which subsequently impact behaviors. But in organizations, what do we typically measure? Behaviors. What do we typically observe? Behaviors. So I challenge all of us to take a step or two back to really figure out what is the emotionality and the psychological and cognitive thing going on that's creating some of the behaviors we see. As I've been on the road doing different consulting with companies, afterwards people will always do this. Dr. Charles, can I talk to you for a minute? I say, sure. Why are we whispering, right? They're whispering because of that poem we just read. Dr. Charles, I say yes. Okay, so here's the issue. I perform well. I'm a top performer, but I hate it here. And I don't like it. And I don't think they really like me, right? So of course, I'm still trying to smile to go in line with the whisper so no one sees that this person is coming and telling me they hate it here. And what we really wind up getting to is this idea that sometimes the behavior we see, performance, is not always aligned with the emotionality and the thoughts that people have. So there are times where I've spoken with clients and they'll say, well, Dr. Charles, let's say we're talking about black talent, right? They're trying to retain and recruit black talent. Dr. Charles, we really want to, maximize our black talent, but I don't think we have as much of an issue as we thought we had because they're high performers. I said, okay. Well, what's the next part of the sentence? Well, that's it. They're high performers, and research shows that people who are satisfied perform well. I said, well, let me teach you a term called cognitive dissonance. And what that means is you can have two opposing thoughts at the same time, right? And so what I then go to explain is that there are certain cultural norms, right, that wind up impacting this. There's certain cultural ancestral histories that wind up impacting things. So if we go sociological and historical, slaves kind of had to do their work, right? And kind of act a little happy as they did it. But does that mean that there was satisfaction that led to performance? You guys follow me with that? So we have to be clear about the fact that just because we are getting the behavior or metric we want does not mean that that individual, that our human capital that we're supposed to be valuing and embracing, right? That's all the language we're using these days, right? And including actually is in a good place and space. And so we have to start to do a better job as organizations doing pulse checks with people in our organizations. But here's where it gets even more nuanced. Guess who else we have to start doing pulse checks with? Ourselves. Because most of the time we're not even clear enough on where we stand related to the slices of our pie, or where we stand related to the identities that we're bringing in, or we're not being aware of the mass that we're bringing in and how people are receiving us. And there's nobody that is innocent of having a bias. We're all clear on that in this room, I'm sure, right? We're all clear that a bias is a human experience that requires conscious and deliberate and active intervention. So right now, for example, I'm going to give you guys two options. Let's say I was bringing cookies in afterwards and I said, I'm going to give you two options, Oreos and Chips Ahoy. Raise your hand if you want Oreos. Raise your hand if you want Chips Ahoy. Do you see how quickly your mind processed your preference? Some of you are biased towards Oreos and chocolate chips, right? So when we think about the cognition process of picking and choosing and preference, yeah, we can all giggle at cookies, but let's say I put a race or ethnicity or gender in there, it's a little uncomfortable, isn't it? So the reality is we have to become better at understanding what we're bringing to the table related to the way our wiring is set up and the way our biases are expressing themselves in the table or the ways we're projecting things. But we can't call ourselves leaders in this space without owning our own stuff too. And that's very, very important. And one of the reasons that it's so important is because the psychology of identity gets really tricky. So there was a time I was speaking with a client and they said, you know, Dr. Charles, we throw these diversity events, but like the people aren't coming. I said, well, what's the event? It was like a potluck. I said, okay, I do breathing exercises, so I did one for a minute. And I said, okay, well, food doesn't change emotional trauma. And food doesn't make people feel connected to the people that have had a set of micro and macroaggressions against them since they've been at this company. It's just kind of not gonna work that way. And so we have to start to understand that this psychology of our identity is what's creating people saying, I'll opt out of that. So when I'm doing workshops with the different employee resource groups at different places, one of the things I talk about is, hey, we can't push organizations on we want you to be inclusive if we self-exclude, right? And we go into what that looks like and what that means. Because what we tend to do as humans, period, is we protect ourselves, right? We're resilient because we protect ourselves. But what that looks like when you're a part of a stigmatized group is that identity protecting oftentimes looks like exclusion, or it looks like avoidance, or it looks like distance to those looking on. Because if you don't understand why people are choosing to pull back and not lean in, right? It's because there's some process they're going on. So the question is, what are organizations doing to peel back those layers? So there's a host of different psychological things that people experience. One of them is identity threat, right? Identity threat, you may hear the language of stereotype threat. That's the fear of confirming a negative stereotype. So if you're a person that is of an identity group that has plenty of stereotypes to go around, and you're walking into spaces where you're the numerical minority, and in your social space you're also in the power minority, then you have to ask yourself, what is that person thinking or feeling? If that person wants to be a high performer, you guys just all got really dark. I don't know if the lights went out, but okay. Whether it is a person who is, well, most people, right, clearly at that point in an organization, want to do well. They're high performers. They're seeking promotion. So the identity of being a successful professional is high, but being a woman, thank you for the lights, but being a woman comes along with certain stereotypes. Being of a minority status may come along with certain stereotypes. Being of LGBTQ community comes along with certain stereotypes. So while every human walking into an organization is trying to manage their professional self, you also have a set of human capital that's managing another self too. And guess what? It's taxing. It is emotionally and cognitively taxing. And so when stereotype threat comes in, our cognitive and brain resources get so wound up and consumed that you're not able to focus on what? The task at hand. Because we all just have a certain amount of capacity. Then you have things like stigma consciousness, which is when you're so aware of the stigmas that are attached to your identity that you're almost walking around like the boogeyman. Now, in the research, it's on a continuum of 1 to 10, right? So you can either be low on stigma consciousness or high on stigma consciousness. But when you're really high, it's kind of distracting, feeling like something is here. So as diversity professionals, we have to ask ourselves, what types of ways is this organization creating a situation where people may feel an extra pressure of the stigmas attached to who they are. But here's the thing, we can't take away affirmation and we can't take away threat. They coexist, right? We're all clear on that, right? Any given identity. But what we can do is kind of manipulate it a bit. Because if you give more moments of affirmation, those moments of threat go down, or the impact of them decrease a bit. But in a lot of organizations, unfortunately, which is why we all do the work we do, those moments of threat are heightened. And so therefore, even when we do our diversity strategy stuff, it may not be tipping the scale because we haven't fixed the moments of threat. So yeah, we have these great, couple of moments over here, but we have to focus on that. Because when we have things like stigma consciousness and when we have things like identity threat, what that induces is uncertainty, and what it induces is ambiguity. And we know that when there's uncertainty and there's ambiguity, there's stress. And I think we all agree we want to decrease the stress levels of the human capital in our organizations. But that's not just about ergonomics or workload. There is an identity workload that people are living through every single day. So I charge us all with focusing on that a bit more. Which leads us to this idea of awareness. The awareness that is necessary are three-pronged. There's environmental awareness. Are we even clear about what is happening in our external environment that could be impacting the identities of people within our organization? So you could start out as macro as our global climate, then take a step into our national climate, and then take a step into our geographical climate, then take a step into our organizational climate, and then even take another step into the team work unit level climate. And then I then say one more step. What is the climate between supervisors and their subordinates? Because guess what? A lot of times there are organizations that top the lists of best diversity companies in the world, and they could be doing everything in their organizational macro power, but there are leaders and supervisors that are creating living you-know-whats for their employees because of their own identity stuff that they're bringing to the table. So we have to start to bridge this macro-micro approach to diversity and inclusion and really start to look deeper at the psychology behind why we're seeing what we're seeing. And then we have to also have a certain level of psychological awareness of self. So now we're shifting to self. So I've been talking to you guys as like leaders. Guess what? Now you're the subjects of this study, okay? So when we're thinking about our own approach to the strategies that we develop, the initiatives that we create, we have to take a step back and say, all right, well, what is informing my lens in which I'm creating this? Am I having an intersectional approach to this? Am I assuming that certain groups are homogenous? Or am I assuming too much difference within a group that has a little bit more homogeneity? Is everybody following me with that? So we have to be very careful about when we create programs. I was working with a company and they said, well, we have a Black employee resource group. I said, okay, great. No, African American employee resource group. I said, okay. I said, well, where do the Africans go? And where do the West Indians go? And where do right? And so I start going down and down and down. I said, well, what do you mean? I said, labeling matters. Oh, but Dr. Charles, I don't mean to be offensive, but like there's Black people and they're African. I said, no, all people that appear to be highly melanated are not of the same ethnic background. So if you are trying to connect with your whole base, you have to start to be able to understand that it's more nuanced. And you know what he said? He said, you know what? I'm from Iowa. I'll never forget. I'm from Iowa, and honestly, Doc, like, Black people have been Black people. And I just never even thought of it that way. Thank you so much. I said, yeah, there's Jamaicans, there's Haitians, there's Nigerians. Oh, and he said, how would I know? I said, you ask, right? You ask. But typically, people will just be put in the category that they're in. So when I'm saying be aware of our own lens that we're coming to the table with, We also have to also understand that women of different ethnic groups have different lived experiences as well. And that's okay. But we have to acknowledge the difference, right? And acknowledging the difference allows us to leverage the difference, right? A little bit better. So we have to start to just get a little bit more nuanced in the way in which we're seeing people, and take off some of the categories that, we've started to place and say, okay, well, what does this individual lived experience look like? Because the reality is that there are people, when I read the narratives that people submit for the Mask Project, there is a deep emotionality to it. There are people hurting. There are people sad. There are people living in constant states of anxiety because they don't know who they need to present when at work and to who and what the effects of it may be. So this isn't just about making sure we have the visual representation to make our nice diversity reports with, or that we have the nice list of programming on our calendar of events. We have to start to get into the psych side and the emotionality of our human capital. So everybody should have a mask that they received either at their table or when they walked in. Does everybody have their mask? Okay, let me see everybody raise it up. Make sure you have it. All right, raise your hand if you do not have one. Okay, my colleague, Ms. Lynch here, will come around and bring some extra ones around, okay? So one of the things that I do when I'm helping people take the step towards identity management is start to peel back those layers and answer some not so easy questions about themselves, okay? Because like I said, our tendency is to, oh, there's people on this side handing them out too. Thank you so much, everybody. When we think about a mask, we think about typically hiding and concealing. So if that's the way, language matters, right? So if we think a mask is to hide and conceal, that's what we're gonna do with it, right? We're gonna hide and conceal. But here's a different perspective I would like everybody to start to think about. We tend to think about authenticity as, oh, be yourself all the time, 365 days, 24/7, all the time. No. There are times and places for certain parts of ourselves. But here's the way I would like us to redefine the way we think about authenticity and people being able to be their authentic self. Authenticity is really the process of being aware of the different masks that you have and having a peace about which ones you wear at what times. Because where people have that internal conflict is when they're presenting certain selves, certain identities, certain masks to the world, and they don't have a peace about it. So they're presenting a part of themselves that they actually don't believe is truly a part of their pizza pie. But what I'd like us to flip and start to think about is, if we think about, we all have a little tool bag, and I saw some nice bags in here, FYI, this morning. We all have a bag that has all our different identities / masks in them. Authenticity is about knowing the depth and diversity of all of the ones you do have, and then putting the right combination of them together to have a piece about who you're showing to the world. Do you guys get that? Right? So it's about this awareness of self. It's about this awareness of the different parts of you and being creative about the different masks you can present to people to be able to align. So my sister here, she has on a nice, fabulous red outfit. I clearly like red dresses because it looks good with my hair color and my skin complexion. So I could see her and automatically, psychologically, I'll say, oh, I like her because I'll put a halo effect over her. She likes red. I like red. That's my homegirl. We wear red, right? Something as simple as alignment with love of bright colors could be a moment of connectivity. Do you guys see that? It doesn't have to, sometimes we make things so deep. Sometimes it's being able to see a piece of art in someone's office or see that little golf ball and say, oh, I play golf too. Let me figure out a way to connect. And that's how we override not connecting with the usual suspect categories and really start connecting on other layers. Okay, so everyone has their mask. What I'd like everybody to do is write down on your mask the list of barriers, the list of things that hold you back from being your most authentic self at work. It could be emotions you feel, thoughts you have, experiences you've had, parts of your personality. There's no limit on what you can write, okay? Oh, y'all thought you were just gonna come here, get information to take back home? No, 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 we're doing some work here, okay? So I want you to have a silent, don't talk to your neighbor. Don't make me go into professor mode and start monitoring that, okay? Write down as many things as you can that are barriers to you, your individual self, being your most authentic self at work and in life. I'll give you guys a minute and a half or so to do that. It can be an emotion, a thought, a value, a belief, a personality characteristic, a feeling, a thought, anything. And you're not relegated to the present. You can dig into the past. There's no right or wrong answer, just a real one. Some of you are like, I don't even know. That's the point. All right. You can keep writing if you're writing. I'm going to kind of speak for a second. So if we were in a micro workshop, my question would say, what did that experience feel like, right? And typically, well, let me ask some people in the front. What did that experience feel like? Okay, so she said she felt like she was bearing her soul and she had to actually ask herself the question, wait, do I even feel authentic or not? All right, someone over here, what did the experience feel like? The same, okay. So what that took us into is this dangerous V word called vulnerability. You know that thing we run from all the time because we think it makes us weak and not strong? But what vulnerability allows us to do, typically we think about being vulnerable for other people, but what research shows is we're not even vulnerable for ourselves. No one likes to look into the metaphorical mirror and say, oh, let me find a bump or a blemish, right? No one likes to look and assess their flaws and their faults, or even if they're not a fault or a flaw, just a challenge. The who we are, but guess what? Those are the things that wind up defining the lens that we see the world through, okay? So what I'd like everyone to do is stand up and turn to a partner. With your mask.
You're a writer. write an article that I was very impressed with on prisons, I think. Last week on...
All righty. I want everyone to cover their face with their mask, with their words facing outwards toward their buddy.
Think about it. It was based on last week's...
Y'all are like, this lady is nuts. Okay.
I've done some research on that. So
And I want you to look at your buddy and repeat after me.
I'm not sure what we're supposed to
No, look at your buddy, not me. Look at your buddy. Today I choose to unmask myself for the purposes of being more vulnerable, being more authentic, and being more transparent. Today I choose to unmask myself for the purposes of being more whole, more true, more satisfied, and more aligned with my world. Today I choose to unmask myself because I need it, the people I lead need it, and the world needs it. Today I choose to unmask myself because it is necessary. All right, you can give your buddy a high five or a hug or whatever you feel comfortable with, all right? So, what I hope you thought or felt, y'all got energy now, huh? Okay. What I hope that you thought and felt as you listened to the words I was saying and as you were speaking them is that you understand that it requires deliberate intention and attention to focus on self. So that little micro exercise we just did, typically if I'm doing a workshop, we do that for 2 hours and dig deep and do both sides and talk about what are the things that hold us back, what are the things that enable us to be our full and authentic selves, right? And we dig deeper into that. But I wanted to give you all a little taste of what that moment of vulnerability feels like, right? And a little taste of what it looks like to sit down and actually think about yourself and write some things down about yourself. All of us in here are in roles where we lead and figure out how to create spaces for people. But I want you all to be very clear that there is no way you can empower the people you lead without you feeling like you're bringing all of you to the table in a way that gives you peace as well. So while we're talking about emotions and psychology and peace and inner peace and all of that, I need us to understand that this is not some pop psych mumbo jumbo. This is real science. It's science. When we feel things, it affects us physiologically. When we think certain thoughts, it impacts our behaviors. This isn't debatable, it just is. And so if we can own that reality for ourselves and then own that reality for the people we lead, there's a different level of sensitivity and empathy we're able to have. Because when we've taken our own self-awareness journey, when we're figuring out how to be aware of our own identities, when we're figuring out how to manage our own identities, then we can facilitate the people we lead doing the same thing. But we can't do that without taking the steps that we need for ourselves. There's so many times that people say, oh, Doc, I wish I took that workshop when I was 22, not 61, right? I would have saved 40 years and a divorce. That's what one lady said, right? And so no matter what age, so whether I'm speaking at a university to students, helping them unmask, or dealing with top leadership execs that are approaching senior citizen area, it's still the same process. So what I did was I created a framework that helps us be more deliberate, right? And actively engage in certain behaviors and thoughts and actions and solutions that can help us get to this kind of place that I've been pushing us to get to. So I called it the Unmasked Framework. Surprise, surprise, right? So as we go through this, I want you to think about it from two lenses. I want you to think about it from your own individual perspective, right? Like you needing to do these things. I also want you to think about it from your organizational perspective, thinking about what things can I set up in my organization that can allow people to do this more freely and in a safe way and in a way that gives them some comfort, right? Decreasing that threat and increasing that, I'm giving a pop quiz verbally right now. Thank you, affirmations. This is my guy, he'd get extra credit points. Okay, so let's start off here. You use your voice. Your voice is literally the expression of you. So when people feel that their identities are being suppressed, or their identities are being minimized, or their identities are not being validated, or most unfortunately, that their identities are not being welcomed into a certain space, the likelihood is they're not going to use their voice, right? It's like a kid. If a kid feels like they're in trouble, what do? Just kind of go to the corner and turn away, right? It's what we do as humans. So using your voice is a conscious thing that is allowing you to override that human tendency to retreat. So anytime you feel like, well, I'm gonna just back up, I'm not gonna say anything, they wanna keep doing that, then you know using your voice is important. Never ignore your thoughts and emotions. So many times people think, oh, I may be seeing this wrong. Oh, maybe I assessed that situation the wrong way. Oh, maybe I'm tripping. Oh, maybe I'm overreacting. Oh, maybe it wasn't what it was. Oh, maybe, and we go through this cycle of self-doubt, questioning our thoughts and our emotions. We have to trust ourselves more. But guess how you build trust in your own thoughts and emotions? Being more self-aware and more self-reflective, right? Having more data points and points of contact with how you're feeling and thinking on the inside. Now here's the caveat with believing and never ignoring your thoughts and emotions. Humans can sometimes be a little delusional. So there's that piece of our humanity, right? Where we can be a bit delusional and write these epic Oscar-nominated storylines about why we think certain things happen, and typically we're the hero and never the villain. But we have to be able to be transparent and vulnerable and honest with ourselves enough to know when we are feeling the right thing. Remember earlier I used that language of pulse check, right? You have to check your pulse enough times to figure out your what? Pattern. So it's not just isolated, it has to be over time. M, manage expectations. So many times we have expectations that are outside of realms of reality, right? The reality is what we see is what we're experiencing, what we're perceiving is our reality in that moment. So the question is, am I managing expectations? Am I being too idealistic? Am I being too pessimistic? Am I believing that what I think can become what it can be, right? And as we are in here, content creators, idea generators, process and system developers, right? That's what we are. What are we doing and how are we processing the expectations we have on the impact that will come? A, acknowledge your vulnerabilities and insecurities. Did y'all feel your body tingling a little bit when I said, now turn your mask outside facing? The decibel in the room went from, right? So I'm assuming you were saying, what does this lady want us to do? Okay. Vulnerability and insecurity takes practice. It literally takes practice. Okay? It doesn't just come. And no, talking to your best friend alone is not vulnerability. Vulnerability that can lead to more diverse and inclusive and empowering environments takes effort. Stretch yourself to be more resilient. S. A lot of times we're living in a very interesting world right now, as we are diversity professionals trying to make sure that everyone feels affirmed and valued. So we have to be very clear that even with all of the challenges and barriers to facilitating social justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, all of that, we have to know and believe that people are resilient to external forces. And organizations are resilient, no matter what external forces may be shifting things in one direction or another. But guess what? We can't only believe that, we have to help our people believe that too. We have to help our people feel psychologically and emotionally safe, even if there are things in the world that may have them not feeling that way. And no, I'm not talking politics right now. I'm literally talking about the reality that there is a narrative in the world in which we're living in where there are certain groups that feel threatened by their category or identity that they're in. And if we are leaders in the D&I space, no matter what our personal thoughts are, or political affiliations, or values, or beliefs may be, our job when we walk into organizations is to make sure that people feel whole, so that they can dig in the ways in which we need them to. K, know your social support system. Who are your people? Ta-da, you have 400 of them here, right? You have 400 of them here, you have work buddies at work, you have your personal family, you have all of those, but vulnerability and this art of unmasking and kind of peeling back those layers takes assistance. It takes assistance. So as we close out, I want you to stand up again. It's the morning, I'm a professor, I know how to get y'all moving, okay. So this is a mantra I created that helps us focus on 4 areas: self-awareness, competence, resilience, and authenticity. If we can create an environment where humans in our organizations and in our communities feel like they know who they are and have a comfort about it, feel competent to do what they need to do, feel like they can be resilient and push through, and feel like they can be their authentic selves, that's how we build the environments that we need. So it is, I know who I am capable, I am strong by design, I am authentically me. So I want you to turn to another neighbor, someone different this time. Now you can tell someone tonight, I was vulnerable with 2 strangers today, okay? All right? Okay. So I'm gonna say it and you're gonna repeat after me. I know who I am. I am capable. I am strong by design. I am authentically me. Okay, now I want you to say it a little stronger. Okay? A little stronger. Okay? I know who I am. I am capable. I am strong by design. I am authentically me. All right, give another high five. So as we close out today and head into Q&A, I want to share with you all that I have thoroughly enjoyed being here with you this morning. I hope I've pushed your brain in a couple of uncomfortable places, because guess what? That's when transformation happens, right? And I hope that as we go through the day, if you guys have any questions, you can feel free to pull me aside, reach out to me. If you need me to come help you at your organizations, do anything, let me know. I'll see you all at the reception this evening. I have my audio book that will be here as well, and any other information on things that I do. So again, thank you so much for being great participants this morning. We have 2 microphones in the middle back there. Let me see get my flight attendant on, okay? And if you have any questions, please come and ask. Great.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just wonderful. So I'm wondering, how can I, as someone who may not be a leader in my organization, help leadership to see the unintended situations or environments that they're creating? And then once they recognize that, how do they get started toward making a change?
Okay, very good question. But I want to say one thing first. Everyone is a leader in their space, because we can all influence change. And the fact that you even have that question means that you have a leadership mentality. So I'm gonna give you that leader identity, that slice of your pie. The first thing is to document. I tell people that all the time. Document situations and moments so that when you do make your case, you actually have data points to present. Because the reality is people often don't believe. If you look at the stat, a lot of you in here know that, if you look at the EEOC stats of percentage that are able to actually come to some type of closure or be validated, like, it's super low. especially when we think things are microaggressions or not intentional. So it's very hard to prove, but I would say document all of the situations and things that you're observing over a certain period of time, and then go to a leader that is trusted, where you kind of trust their character and intention around things, and say, hey, as somebody, as a member of this organization, this is what I've been seeing. I've been documenting it for a minute, because guess what? People can't deny facts, right? But oftentimes we respond in emotionality. Something bad happens in a meeting, then we just go to someone's office. Every time they go to this, right? That's typically the way things come. But I'm a proponent of facts and data and patterns, and people can't deny that. So once they have that, I think also giving your own personal suggestions, right? And then you can tell them to call me. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a question for you on your thoughts on how authentic you should be in the corporate workplace when there may be pieces of you that fit into already perceived notions or stereotypes, specifically if you're in an underrepresented group.
Okay, so and this is very interesting because I literally just had this conversation with my daughter who's in junior high school. Who you are walks in the room whether you communicate who you are or not. So your mere presence is going to activate somebody's bias. That's a fact. So the fact that it's a fact means you can take it off as a fear, right? If you know something is going to be a reality, take it off as a fear, know that it's a fact, and start to do things to strategize, right? So things like in the unmasked framework that I just presented, having a piece about which parts of yourself you bring to the table, right? So I'm a professor at my alma mater, for example. So it was homecoming weekend, so I had a ball as an alum, not just a faculty member. But I had to say, my students may be here, right? I may not be able to dance as hard to my favorite song because I don't want to end up on Snapchat somewhere. That's just a reality, right? That I have to know going in. Did I feel like I was inauthentic, holding myself back in certain ways? No, I just knew that was the strategy for the moment, right? So you have to start to see things as, what's the strategy for the moment? But do I have a piece about whatever strategy I'm using?
That's good.
You get what I mean?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Yes.
Good morning, Dr. Charles.
Good
my
morning.
name is Lakeisha Button. I'm from PCC Global in Blythewood, South Carolina.
Okay, nice to
And
meet
my
you.
question is, in the past, while you've been administering the exercise that we just completed with the unmasking, what are the top 2 issues that you found from women and that you found from men?
Okay, so what people typically write down?
Yes, ma'am.
So women struggle with self-doubt a lot. And I think we probably all know because we live in a world where women typically aren't validated, right, and are minimized. And so from childhood, we're told boys are better at this or better at that. And so that internalized self-doubt is definitely the biggest thing that I wind up doing coaching around. So that's for women. For men typically are concerned about how the world sees them because they don't want to be the bad guy. Right, and I'm going to intersect race with this. So I was doing an implicit bias workshop at an energy company in Arkansas, and it was 99% older white male leadership. And I did an exercise similar to this, and they wrote down and said, what's your biggest thing you're excited about? What's your biggest fear moving out of this workshop? And the biggest fear was, I hope that the awareness I have today, I'm able to facilitate for myself over time. Right? So like, yeah, doc, I get it today. Like, yeah, you opened up my eyes a bit today, but I fear that I'm gonna fall back into my regularly scheduled programming of it not being on my radar. So those are the 2 things that I definitely see the most.
Okay, thank you very much for your
You're
insight.
welcome, thanks. Okay, last question.
Thank you, Dr. Charles. Well,
Thank you.
I've been thinking about disability
Yeah.
as an identity that intersects with every other identity and yet isn't discussed that much in diversity events. Even though, people who are disabled bring special things to the table, experiences and so forth. And I'm curious whether in your mask project, people write about disability as something that they deal with in institutions or the workplace.
So what I have found, and you're 100% right with everything that you've said, and I think the reason it gets a little nuanced is between the hidden versus visible disability piece. right? So people with a visible disability tend to speak about it more because when they walk in the room, it's visible, right? But what I actually have seen people share more is their hidden psychological disabilities. So people battling with anxiety or people battling with depression and a host of other things that are either, disorders that they have, as a baseline, but a lot of it is triggered by things they experience at work. So anxiety-inducing environment can trigger daily anxiety that could require medicine or therapy or intervention, right? And so that's why I said we have to start to think about the emotion and psychology piece of that, because it is health related. It's health related. When people feel like they can't be themselves, and when people feel like they're hiding and constantly going through this emotional, psychological back and forth, it is consuming. And I think that a lot of people actually have issues that require intervention but aren't seeking it because of stigma as well.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody.